Good evening, everyone. Hope you're well. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast on the podcast. It has been a busy week. We're not going to dilly-dally too much at the start of the show as we're wont to do, but it is important to start by mentioning a congratulations to you, Andrew, on the purchase of your first home. How do you feel? Do you feel an adult?
I do. I'm approaching 40, so it's probably about time. Now we just got to deal with closing and all that fun and exciting stuff. We had an inspection done today. I was just reading through that report. Lots of words in there I don't know anything about, but yeah, everything's on track. So pretty big deal here.
What was the worst part about searching for a home in the current environment?
So we would put in offers that we were told were competitive according to our realtor, and then there would be all these jack wagons who flip houses for a living offering cash. And we would get screwed out of our offer because if you're a seller, of course you're going to take cash, and we don't have that kind of cash laying around. So that was probably the worst part, other than interest rates and all that terrible stuff. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you're definitely buying at a point where, like, 3 years from now, if interest rates ever go down, you need to refinance immediately. But what were the three things that you and Nicolette, your wife, had circled that you were like, that a house we buy has to have these things?
Oh, wow. Really wanted a finished basement. So that was good. Yard. We wanted a fenced in yard. This one does not have a fenced in yard, but we can always do that because we want to get another dog at some point. And then hopefully going to be starting a family soon. So school districts and that kind of thing. So, but the basement was honestly my big thing. So that was very high up on the list.
Because you need a space for yourself. You need a home for Andy.
Yeah, man, I need to set up like a professional podcast studio like you have. I don't know if I'm ever going to get to that point, but we'll see.
Well, you can do anything you put your mind to, man. I learned that from my good friend Eminem. I think it's important as we start this episode of Talking Stuff to go back a few days, go back to the commitment of Bo Jackson. Ohio State lands commitment number 13 in the class of 2025. We talked about it a little bit on a Snap Judgments episode earlier this week with Austin and Bill, but you know, it was a funny way that things work here because Bo, you know, I've been trying to tell you for 2 months, like, stop worrying that much about Bo Jackson. You did not want to believe me and instead continued to buy into the hype being created elsewhere and the click machine. That being the case, there was at least an expectation from talking to Bo on Sunday that he was not ready to announce anything yet. But I know that he had told the Ohio State coaching staff on Sunday of his intentions. And at that point, I don't know if he just needed a couple days to tell the Alabama and Georgia staff, or if he intended to just finish the visits out and then announce or whatever. But, you know, as you look at Bo Jackson, the rankings are pretty consistent across the board, more consistent actually probably than Jordan Davison, for example, another running back Ohio State's recruiting. Jordan Davison told Adam Gorney from Rivals.com, and Rivals has Jordan as the number one ranked running back in the country, so fairly important from that perspective, that the commitment of Bo Jackson does not impact him at all. And you know, Ohio State has been brutally honest with the running backs they're recruiting, that they want 3 running backs in this class. And I don't think if anyone objectively looks at the roster and sees that next year you're going to have just Sam Williams-Dixon and James Peoples, that 3 running backs should be scary, but it's still a difficult sell. And that's why I think the most important thing about the Bo Jackson commitment is that it shows to me that a player who could go to Alabama or Georgia is buying what Carlos Locklyn and Ryan Day are telling them and believing what the message is from Ohio State. And in recruiting right now, there are so many things being said and so many promises being made and so many different ways that kids are being approached. I think the willingness to look Ryan Day in the eye and say, I believe that what you're telling me is correct. You guys are going to handle it this way. They've seen Ohio State do the running game with multiple backs before. I think that's really important that these kids are buying it. And I think we'll see that again next week, Andrew, with Isaiah West when he visits. But the sell job for Jordan Davison has to get even more difficult if Isaiah West commits, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. But if there's ever a class when taking 3 running backs should come, I don't want to say relatively easy, but compared to other years, I mean, that depth chart is got to be, I mean, that's appealing for next year. You're going to lose Henderson. You're going to lose Judkins. So they need 3. And we've heard guys in the past, I think back to the Travion Henderson and Evan Pryor class, where they've talked about that wear and tear that comes to running backs. And we all know running backs have a short shelf life the way it is. So I think if they play this correctly, they can get those 3. Obviously, Michigan is going to be telling Jordan Davison this weekend, hey, you're our guy now. Ohio State's got a guy already, which is funny because Marquise Davis was Michigan's guy, and now he's committed to Kentucky. But I think they can get 3. It's going to be tough. I will say with Bo Jackson, just kind of going back to that, you had mentioned Alabama and Georgia as threats, but you still had him to Ohio State. I genuinely thought there was a chance he was going to commit to Georgia coming off of that visit. So I'm an idiot. But I think with Jackson, the biggest thing is just going to be his health. He's kind of played defense a lot. I don't know if he's going to just play running back this year, but if he stays healthy, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what kind of numbers he can come up with as a senior, I guess.
I think one of the interesting things that Ohio State is going to be able to approach these high school running backs with is this. They're telling them very clearly they're going to take 3 running backs. There's going to be 3 new running backs added to the roster by this time next year. So as a recruit, as a high school recruit, would you rather Ohio State add 3 running backs from high school or 2 running backs from high school and 1 guy that's a college junior? Like, which guy is going to more impact your ability to play next year? And if you're a guy that believes in yourself and you think that you're going to come in and be a contributor right away, I actually think it makes more sense to suggest or to want a 3rd high school running back.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you on that. And we've talked before about the numbers for this class, and we've said maybe they get 2 guys and they add a portal guy, but I'm totally with you on that. If I'm Jordan Davison or Isaiah West or Bo Jackson for that matter, I would rather it be that way than them go and get some, stud running back like a Trey Sermon type or somebody like that. So I'm with you on that.
As Jordan Davison gets ready to visit Michigan this weekend, I don't know if Isaiah West is visiting Kentucky or not. That was the thought or the plan when he initially decommitted a month ago. And I don't think that visit is going to happen. And so it sets up pretty nicely for Ohio State with Jordan Davison on the weekend of the 21st. The question I have here really is how does a West commitment change things for Jordan Davison? Because obviously he says the Bo Jackson one does not change anything. Would a commitment from Isaiah West change it a little bit? And I think that it probably does, at least a skosh. But what I've learned about Carlos Locklyn in a very short period of time is that he is not emotional about these things, if that makes sense. If an Isaiah West decision comes prior to Jordan Davison's official visit and it changes things with Jordan Davison, I don't think, and this is going to sound dismissive in some way, and it's not meant to, I don't think Carlos Locklyn is going to shed a tear if things go wrong with Jordan Davison, because he will just go to the next guy, because that's how he's built. This is not this is a guy who has no problem telling these recruits, you are coming here to be a really good running back, and if you don't, I'll find another one. And I actually really like that approach. I don't think in the world we're currently living in, you can be a coach that's too emotional or romantic about individual relationships and recruiting. If something changes and the kid wants to go somewhere else, then great. If he wants to still come to Ohio State, then that's awesome too. And I still believe, as of today, it's June 6th as we record this, I still think Ohio State will land a commitment from both Isaiah West and Jordan Davison. But there's going to be a lot of that conversation from now through the end of Isaiah West's visit, which will come the weekend of the 14th of June, especially because Davison just spent the weekend at Alabama. He's now visiting Michigan. He's got the Oregon visit coming up before Ohio State. Those 3 teams are all going to be coming at it from a very different place than Ohio State is. Ohio State has, I think, the ace in the hole, which is Jordan Davison has said and been plain about it that he wants to come to Ohio State. Now, that doesn't mean that you have a lot of other things, shifting and sands shifting, and that can change things. But I think the relationship with Ryan Day, the relationship with Locklyn from when he was at Oregon, there is a genuine love of Ohio State for Jordan Davis. And that did start with Tony Alford as the running backs coach. So I think it's fascinating to imagine how Alford will attack that this weekend when he's in Ann Arbor. I think that's just going to be crazy.
Yeah, I think the safe bet, if you're an Ohio State fan, is to assume that Isaiah West is committed before Jordan Davison makes that trip to Columbus. So like you said, he said having one back isn't a huge deal. We may find out very soon how he feels about having two committed. And just to check, you said that the Oregon official visit for Davison is before the trip to Columbus on the 21st, correct?
Yeah, the trip to Oregon is the 14th weekend, as far as I know.
Okay. Well, I like that. I like Ohio State being after Oregon, because I would say we both still, as of today, feel that Oregon is the biggest threat. And Oregon's got a running back committed, De'Aaron Hill, who maybe is more of an athlete type than a pure running back. But I mean, if he gets those three guys for Carlos Locklyn, that is a grand slam and a hell of a first cycle in Columbus for him.
Yeah, I think he can do it. I think that right now, as we record this on the evening of June 6th, I think that is still the likely outcome. But this weekend has the potential to put a wrinkle in that. And then the next weekend, when Isaiah West visits Ohio State again, that has a chance to really stir the pot. So speaking of, interesting things happening, camp season has opened at Ohio State. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast daily. So if you haven't watched that on Thursday morning or earlier in the week when we prefaced what we were expecting, or Friday morning, if you're watching this later, we talk about it again, what we saw on Thursday. If you're watching this before Thursday morning or Friday morning, then it's like you're going to be going back in time or you're going forward in time. But I'm not sure about time travel, Andrew. What I am sure about is that I really love camp season. First 2 days have been pretty interesting at Ohio State. I'm not going to lie. Thursday was, I don't want to say a bad camp, because that's silly to say when you have a 5-star quarterback in Tavian St. Clair, the country's number one ranked defensive lineman in the class of 2026 and overall prospect, Jahkeem Stewart, when you have Nate Roberts coming into town from Oklahoma to camp, when you have, I think, 5 of the top 12 tight ends in the class of 2026 were in town all camping. There are some really good things about Thursday, but it was not quite as intriguing to me as Wednesday was. Ohio State offered Victor Singleton, the Toledo Central Catholic 2026 cornerback, on Wednesday. They offered Jacob Weatherspoon, a defensive back, a cornerback from Avon, on Wednesday as well. So now you have 3 different in-state cornerbacks in the class of 2026 offered, which is pretty interesting considering right now in the class of 2025, you have Devin Sanchez and Neem offered. And I talked about this a little bit with Bill and Austin on the Friday morning podcast daily. So it's a little preview if you're watching it early. But when you have players committed like Sanchez and offered, like the expectation from an NIL standpoint is that you're going to spend a lot of money on those types of players, right? To not just bring them in, but yet to be able to retain them and keep them happy down the road until the profit sharing and all that stuff happens, and we actually get a sense of exactly what guys are going to be able to make. So the luxury that Tim Walton has, and to a lesser extent probably Justin Fry in the class of 2026 in Ohio with the offensive line, with Adam Guthrie, with Maxwell Riley, with Sam Greer, with Will Conroy. Like, if Ohio State's in a position in 2025 where you're chasing David Sanders, for example, the number one player in the country, like, you're going to have to kind of blow out the bank a little bit in 2025. And it is shaping up really nicely for Ohio State in state in 2026 to help mitigate that.
Yeah. Tim Walton has obviously proven himself as a recruiter already. And it's looking like he's not going to have to really, and I mean, I know there's national names as well, but he may not have to go all that far for the 2026 class. And like you said, same for Justin Fry. So I don't know if that's going to allow them to maybe allocate some of those NIL funds differently to different positions, or how that's all going to work out. But yeah, I mean, you're the guy who gets to go to the camps and stuff. So, I mean, I know that you're the one that knows all that stuff, but the biggest thing switching gears just for a second, that I was watching this week at camp was I I've got a couple of my buddies like follow Dayton high school football closely. I do not. But the receiver from Wayne was.
Well, you're going to have to. You're a Dayton resident now, baby.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I need to up my game a bit. But that Jahkeem Brown kid, I've only heard horror stories about how fast he is, and I've heard Ted Ginn's name mentioned in the same sentence as him before, which is probably ludicrous. But I know he was offered, so I was watching that one early. Well, he's 27, right?
He's the class of 2027. He's the first Ohio State or Ohio prospect offered by the Buckeyes in the 2027 class.
Yeah. So the biggest thing I was watching this week at camp from afar was to see if that kid got offered this early, and then to see if any of the in-state 2025 offensive linemen were offered, which they were not. But then the story of it ended up being the 2026 defensive backs, like you alluded to. So interesting week, it sounds like.
Let's say this, Jahkeem Brown, the 2027 from Wayne High School, he is a 10-4 guy in the 100 as a high school freshman. He's a national 60-meter champion as a freshman. 10-4 in the 100 is a tenth of a second faster than Ted Ginn ran as a junior in high school. So 10-5 is obviously blazing. Now, that being said, I think it's really important to distinguish the difference between football speed and track speed. And Ted Ginn Jr. is the fastest football player I've ever seen. And based on what we saw on Wednesday with Jahkeem Brown, he does not yet know how to turn that track speed into the football speed. I mean, he's fast. He wasn't being caught. I mean, he was running by people, and that's not to suggest that he's not going to turn into that type of speed. But for Brian Hartline, and this is what makes Brian Hartline so fascinating as a recruiter, as a receiver coach, he does, like, if a guy's running a 4.5 in the 40, and Brown was about 4.55 or something like that from what I heard on Wednesday, so it doesn't really translate into that 10.4 doesn't really translate into his 40 time. Jaden Ricketts from Watkins Memorial in Pataskala, who was offered by Ohio State on Thursday, it runs a faster 40 than Jahkeem Brown. He ran it in like 4.41. So he's almost 0.2 of a second faster. But when it comes to track speed, like that is different. And so as Jahkeem Brown starts to understand how to actually run and how to change his body and how to control his speed in and out of breaks and all of the things that Brian Hartline actually cares about, that's when we'll see him really take the next leap. I was surprised that they offered Jahkeem Brown as early as they did, only because I came into the camp on Wednesday having been a little bit tainted by what I saw from him at the Under Armour camp in Canton at the end of April, which was a player that clearly ran really well, but I didn't think he caught the ball particularly well. And he was a much better pass catcher on Wednesday at Ohio State than he was a month ago. So whether that was just a bad day because the quarterbacks were inconsistent in Canton or whatever it was, he answered that question for me. And the bottom line is this: if you're in the state of Ohio and you're 6.5 inches tall, you're 6'1.5 inches, and you're running a 4.5 as a freshman, you're going to get offered by Ohio State. And there's no, and you show the basic competency in athletic control of your body and catching the ball, then you're going to get offered. If you're by Brian Hartline, especially is, and I don't want to say he's looking for an easy recruitment, but I bet that Brian Hartline, if you were able to really dig down deep into his heart, he would tell you he is exhausted by having to do these wire-to-wire, all national, all the time recruitments for these kids around the country. And by offering Jaden Ricketts and Jahkeem Brown in the last 2 days, I think he's allowed himself the opportunity to take a little bit of a breath.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hell of a lot easier than recruiting South Florida. So I would feel the same way if I was in his shoes, I guess. Sorry, I keep bouncing around here, but going back to the defense.
We're talking Ohio State's first 2 one-day camps, Wednesday and Thursday. So anything you want to talk about from those camps, just let's do it.
Yeah, I've had a busy week with the house and stuff, so I've read your updates, but I'm not in tune like I usually am. With the defensive backs, they offered Singleton in that. We're not going to play in or out now or anything, but obviously Ohio State usually gets the guys they want in the state. Early vibes on those offers, I assume pretty positive. If you're starting to pencil in names for 26 and beyond, are those maybe names that would be safe to kind of put down in pencil for the time being, would you say?
Yeah, as long as everyone handles their business off the field between Elbert Hill, Jacob Weatherspoon, and Victor Singleton, I would be stunned if any one of those guys ends up somewhere else. And which again makes Tim Walton's job pretty easy for 2026. So it's 3 guys that can be on campus a lot. It's 3 guys that he can get to see easily. And I think that it does, again, especially because the 25 cornerback class, which we'll talk a little bit more about later when we mention Dorian Brew and Brandon Finney and other guys like that. Like having those guys close to home is a luxury, and it is not at all to suggest that they are not Ohio State caliber players or that the Buckeyes are taking the easy road or approach. They just happen to be very, very fortunate. This is serendipity at its finest that you've got 3 guys in the state who are that good in the class of 2026. Ohio State's already offered 8 players in the class of 2026 inside of Ohio. That is an early head start, and that is 3 cornerbacks and 3 offensive linemen. So, like, it's unusual at this point. I thought one of the more interesting side notes, we'll talk about Jahkeem Stewart because he definitely deserves his own portion of the show. We're already 20 minutes in here. We're only on, this might be a long show, and I was hoping to get through this in like 40 minutes, but
it's my fault.
The Buckeyes have like 6 or 7 of their top 2026 quarterback prospects coming in like on June 17th for one camp. So it's going to be a very competitive, like balls to the wall type of day to figure out if one guy rises above and starts to stand out in that group. But they offered their first 2027 quarterback today on Thursday, Brady Edmonds from California. Brady actually camped at Ohio State a year ago as well when he was a freshman, or just finishing up his 8th grade season. So this is freshman year he just finished, right? He was at that time a player that coaches that I talked to at Ohio State were like very excited about, like, hey, we think this kid could be the real deal. He came back this summer and looks great. You're talking like a legit 6'4", 185, 190 pounds. I talked to his dad a lot on Thursday. His dad's dad, so Brady's grandfather, is from Cuyahoga Falls in Ohio. Obviously never a bad thing. Because of that, his grandfather, his father, and Brady and the rest of his family are all huge Ohio State fans. So there's a rarity. This is the kid who is going to be in contention to be the number 1 ranked quarterback in the country in the class of 2027 and maybe the number 1 ranked player in the class. So it's an early head start that's worth talking about. I normally wouldn't get that far ahead, but his dad told me that Brady 2 years ago had his screensaver on his phone to have, he had his personal goals as a screensaver, what he wanted to do. And the 3rd goal was play football at Ohio State. So now that he's earned his offer, I'm not saying that's one to watch like quickly, but I would not be surprised if Brady Edmonds ends up being the quarterback in the class of 2027 for Ohio State. He's actually named after Tom Brady because his father's father moved to Boston when he was very young. And the only thing from Ohio that really stuck with him was Ohio State. So they're actually big Patriots fans, Celtics fans, Bruins fans, Red Sox fans. So he's actually named after Tom Brady, which is somewhat comical, I guess. But yeah, that's definitely one to watch. If we're talking about the early offers, like that's a real one.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't even know what's going to happen for 2026 yet at quarterback. So now we've got a name on the radar already for 27. So that's cool.
Yeah, that is the problem. So Noah Grubbs, who's probably my favorite quarterback in the class of 2026, just committed to Notre Dame a couple days ago. So that board is wide open, and we're going to get some clarity here in the next 2 weeks or so. But there's not going to be a guy that I think emerges that quickly in that class. And I think there's actually some luxury. Again, we're getting into the weeds pretty much on this show, I guess. But because you have Tavian St. Clair committed in the class of 2025, and if you can identify and pick that 2027 guy pretty early, which maybe they're able to do, it actually affords Ohio State a little bit of a luxury to take a flyer on someone in 2026. And maybe it doesn't have to be quite as safe a bet. So maybe they find someone that's a little bit different athletically. Maybe they find someone that has one or two traits that are exceptional, but a little bit wild in other areas. So I think it actually sets up pretty nice if they can really hone in on Edmonds as the guy in 27. So, I mean, again, we're getting very much into the minutia and into the weeds here. Jahkeem Stewart, 2026 defensive lineman from Baton Rouge area. He's from New Orleans, but this is a battle, I think, from talking to people on Thursday, that really feels like Ohio State, LSU, USC. If I'm LSU, I probably begin a plot to kidnap the kid's family or something, and then hold him hostage and not let him leave the state of Louisiana. It's very rare at Ohio State when you see a high school kid walking around and every one of the coaches is like, "Oh my gosh, did you see that kid? Did you see that kid?" And that was what was happening on Thursday. Then he participates in the camp, full go, does everything every other camper does, no special treatment, no coddling him at all, and he really seemed to enjoy it. The big question people are going to have is, what is he doing with reclassification? I asked him about it post camp, and he said that he lets his coach handle that. It was a very artful dodge of the question that he doesn't really want to answer. There is a almost certainty that he will reclassify into the class of 2025, but I don't expect anything official to happen until like October or November. So what you'll probably end up seeing is Stewart, who's visiting USC next week, but then he'll probably lay low for a while and visit places in the South. And then you'll see him pop up like in October or November at Ohio State, probably for an official visit when he is in reclassifying to the class of 2025. Is it a long shot? I don't like to say long shot, Andrew, because then that people think that it can't happen. But like, kids from Louisiana do leave Louisiana. They don't generally leave Louisiana and go north. So it's like, if you leave that area, you're going further south. Okay. There's plenty of guys. Ed Reed's from Louisiana. Devin Smith or Devin Brown, the wide receiver for the Eagles. Which one's that?
Devontae Smith, not Devin Smith. Sorry. Like, he's from Louisiana. Those guys are willing to go elsewhere. But you have to, the Etiennes are from Louisiana. Like, there's guys that are willing to leave. So you just don't normally see them going south. Ohio State 10 years ago would not be even getting in the batter's box here. But because we're in the age of NIL, because you have Alan Clark, who's very tied into the Louisiana scene and New Orleans, like, you're going to take that swing, and they're very much in it. Now, do you win it? I don't know. But it does set up some interesting conversations heading into official visit season, because Larry Johnson has London Merritt committed. He has Zaire Mathis committed. And those are just two defensive ends. Defensive tackle wise, Cole Breeler, New Jersey, who was expected to take an official visit to Ohio State, is just committed to Stanford. So he's not going to be visiting. It's pretty wide open, especially at defensive tackle. They did not offer Drayden Pavey this week at camp yet. I talked to Drayden, Cincinnati Taft, defensive tackle, who said that Larry Johnson was very honest with him and told him that he's looking at 3 or 4 guys who are built pretty much the same and play pretty much the same, and he wants to get them in camp this week, and then he'll make a decision. But it does put Ohio State in a interesting pickle, kind of, because like, you have to save a spot for Jahkeem Stewart for when that reclassification becomes fully materialized. But at the same time, you can't just sit back and not recruit other guys. I think the best thing about the Jahkeem Stewart recruitment is that, heading into this at bat, that it's only going to be like a 6-month at bat, because if this went on for another 18 months, I think everyone would go crazy. Yeah, you're exactly right. I know you tweeted out a photo of him earlier, and he legitimately looks like he's about 35. So that was pretty cool. I agree with what you're saying about Louisiana kids coming up to Ohio, but I think just the fact that he's visited twice already in, a pretty short period of time, that's at least promising. I saw some chatter on an LSU site about the LSU recruiting folks thinking that LSU was trailing Ohio State and USC. I think there's actually some Oregon talk too, but he's a kid that anybody in the country, Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, anybody is going to hold a spot for until whenever. So yeah.
And right now, like the Alabamas, the Georgias, they're not really involved yet, and everyone's sort of just laying in the weeds, waiting for the reclassification to become official, and then you know exactly how you slot him. But bottom line, he's really, really good. I think he will be in contention for the number 1 overall player in the class of 2025 when he does reclassify. And it's cool to get to watch kids like that. I actually saw Jahkeem Stewart the first time heading into his freshman year. I was at the All-American Combine in San Antonio, and somebody introduced me to him, and he was like, at that time, like 6'4", 318 pounds. And I was like, that is not. And they're like, yeah, this is a 2026. I'm like, no, he's not. That's a lie. And it's pretty crazy. He definitely caught the attention of everyone in the building. We're going to take a quick break, reset, take a drink of water, because we've gone 31 minutes already without even diving into the weekend's official visitors. We'll try to speed things along here. This is a very verbose episode, but Andrew and I will be right back on Talking Stuff. We're back on Talking Stuff. Andrew Ellis and myself, Jeremy Birmingham, talking stuff about Ohio State's football recruiting efforts, which have gone fairly well in the last couple of days. It's fun, but it is a lot going on for the coaches. Ryan Day called June a bear last week when we talked to him at Roosters, and the bear is fighting back. And this weekend, Ohio State has 10 official visitors on campus again. They had 10 last weekend. We will now have 3 of Ohio State's 13 commitments on campus this weekend. Desai Jones, Eli Lee, and Cody Haddad will be in town. Eli was actually in town last weekend helping recruit Riley Pettijohn, helping recruit Justin Hill. So not a surprise that he's there this weekend. He'll pretty much be there every weekend in the official visit season. Nate Roberts, initially there had been some discussion about him doing his official visit this weekend, but instead he flew in and camped on Thursday and will stay through Saturday as an unofficial visitor. Tavian St. Clair will return to campus, and they'll both be there to help the Ohio State recruiting efforts. They don't need to recruit these 3 players, and Desai Jones and Eli Lee and Cody Haddad, but there are some big time players on the offensive side of the ball coming to Ohio State. We'll just dive into them. Quincy Porter, wide receiver from New Jersey, who visited Penn State last weekend. There's a lot of talk about Michigan. There's a lot of talk about this being a 3-team Big Ten battle. I was told a couple weeks ago that maybe to watch for Alabama if they got involved and see if he takes in a sneaky visit there. That doesn't seem to have happened yet. Big weekend for Ohio State with Quincy Porter, because if you look at the guys that Ohio State's recruiting at wide receiver, Desai Jones, Decorian Moore, Vernell Brown, Phillip Bell, Dalen McCutcheon, all those dudes are like 6 foot tall and 190 pounds. And then you have Quincy Porter, who's like that 6'3.5", 215 pound receiver, much more in the Marvin Harrison mold body style. And Brian Hartline's preference is to have a variation. And so I think Quincy Porter is actually in a unique position for Ohio State, that where Hartline is going to have some conversations with the Talon Taylors of the world, the Phillip Bells and McCutcheons, et cetera, to try to figure out like the pecking order and who's ready to go when and that sort of thing. I think Quincy Porter is as safe a bet to have a spot in this class as I would say that Decorian Moore is, if he wants it, which, take it for what you want. I guess we'll find out this weekend if he wants it. I know there's a lot of buzz about Michigan.
Yeah, I know he just visited Penn State, and some of the Penn State side suggested that Michigan might be in the best position right now, but that's obviously before the Ohio State visit. If I were a wide receiver, obviously I'm an Ohio State fan, but throw that to the side. If I were an unbiased wide receiver picking between those 3 schools just based on the offenses, I think the decision would be pretty easy. I kind of am watching that one this weekend as maybe somebody who could pop coming off the weekend. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. But in your estimation, he's in that Decorrian Moore category as far as a guy that could absolutely commit right now. Correct?
Yeah, 100%. And again, that's because he's different. Like he is, as the kids say, built different. I think because Quincy doesn't really talk a lot. I think that like the belief that Michigan is the front runner here might be based on people not knowing like exactly if he's prioritized at Ohio State or not, and assuming he's not for some reason because of Jamie French, because of Vernell Brown, because of Decorrian Moore, et cetera. And that is definitely not true. He is absolutely prioritized by the Buckeyes, and that I think knowing that should probably change some perception, but we'll see who listens to this show or not. After that, there's 3 offensive linemen visiting. All 3 of them are 100% takes today. If any one of them wanted to commit, even with big visits coming from Micah DeBose and David Sanders. That's California offensive tackle Jackson Lloyd. That's Washington D.C., Baltimore DMV offensive guard Javen McFadden, and Georgia center prospect Andrew Stargell. You talked about the in-state players who camped at Ohio State on earlier this week. In the class of 2025, Jake Cook and Nolan Davenport, you mentioned them. Neither one of them were offered by Ohio State on Wednesday. And Nolan Davenport turned around and committed to Wisconsin on Thursday. So, I think he was clearly given an indication that, hey, we're not ready to get there with you. Jake Cook, who's already been committed to Louisville. I think that there's a discussion to be had for Ohio State when it comes to Jake Cook and Andrew Stargell. If Stargell doesn't come out of this weekend saying, I'm ready to go, let's go, and he still wants to visit Kentucky and still wants to visit Auburn, et cetera, I'm not going to predict that Ohio State would immediately offer Jake Cook, but I think that there's a real conversation after what the Buckeyes saw out of Jake Cook on Wednesday to have him in that center role as opposed to Stargell. And I think that actually surprises Ohio State a lot, because despite all of the conversation we've had in the last 6 weeks about this new and improved Jake Cook, I don't think anyone at Ohio State really believed it until they saw it on Wednesday. And now they're actually forced to have a conversation about it. And there's going to be some people who say, well, if he's an Ohio kid and there's that discussion, then why do you have to just offer him? And I just don't think that's the way it goes. And I don't think Ohio State should be held to a weirder standard to, like, if Jake Cook was in Georgia and had spring football for 3 years and all of the other advantages that you have in the South as far as preparation and workouts and all that, like, I think a lot of this stuff falls on the Ohio High School Football Athletic Association. And Jake Cook was not the player that he is right now the last 2 years when he came to Ohio State. And there's no way Ohio State should have ever considered offering him over the last couple of years until what he is right now. So now you have to ask yourself, is he maxed out? Has he hit a ceiling? Can he get better? Like, there's actually some more evaluation that has to happen now that he's in the conversation, now that he's worked himself actually into the discussion. But it can't be the end of the discussion, because now you're finally just looking at him as a real prospect. So, like, now you have all the other parts you have to parse through. And I know that will frustrate people, but I don't think it's the wrong approach.
Do you think they could hold off until November, December and offer him, assuming he's still committed to Louisville, whatever, and still potentially get him in the fold? I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just wondering if that could be a realistic timeline too.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, and I don't want to suggest things that maybe can change over time. But if Ohio State would have offered Jake Cook on Wednesday, Jake Cook would have been committed by the time I got to my car. Okay. Like, it would not have taken long. If they offer him in 3 weeks, let's say they get through June and Stargell hasn't committed, and there's maybe Henry Fanuku falls through and ends up at Georgia or A&M, or then maybe that conversation that would have lasted 3 seconds on Wednesday takes 15 seconds instead. And if they don't offer at the end of June and they offer in September, maybe that conversation takes 2.5 minutes instead. And if you wait until November, maybe it takes 5 minutes. Maybe it takes 2 phone calls. I don't know. but Jake Cook wants to play at Ohio State, and Jake Cook believes he's good enough to play at Ohio State, and Ohio State did not have it in their minds that he would even force them to reconsider, and then he did, and now you have some very interesting discussions. I'm rooting for him. I mean, we talked about it on the podcast daily on Thursday. Like, a lot of people are going to be rooting for Jake Cook, no matter what happens with him. So, the worst thing from an Ohio State perspective is that he ends up playing really great football somewhere else. And the worst thing maybe is that we're talking about him so much that Wisconsin or, Penn State or someone like that offers him, which would be a lot harder to pull off a flip if it came down to it, because they're much better at creating chips on shoulders. Let's talk defense. Damian Shaquin, Trajan Odom, Fahim Delane are the official visitors on the defensive side of the ball this week. At one point or another in all three of these battles, Ohio State has been the prohibitive favorite. And at one point or another in these recruitments, there have been people wondering if the Buckeyes are slipping and fading away. That's happening right now with Damian Shanklin, who visited LSU a weekend ago and immediately started receiving crystal ball predictions and future casts and RPMs for the Tigers. He's from Indianapolis. That's well within the Buckeyes' backyard, and certainly not a player that they want to lose. A true edge rusher at 6'5", 230 pounds. Like he's the prototypical defensive end that Ohio State has struggled to recruit in the last few years. Why it's been a struggle, I don't think anyone really knows, but the visit this weekend is big. He announced on Thursday that he is announcing his commitment in August. So that'll be August 29th, I think he said. So there's no real hurry, I guess, but you do need to swing things back towards your side here if you're Ohio State this weekend. And I don't know if the LSU thing is just a recency thing. A lot of times for these kids who have not really had like an extended 3 or 4 year long recruitment where they've been everywhere and they've seen everything, they take these official visits and they are completely blown away. And so the initial feedback when you're in the early portion of your recruitment, like this process can show you things you would have like never imagined, right? Like this is Aladdin putting Jasmine on the flying carpet and being like, this is a whole new world, like this is different. So Ohio State gets their chance to take him on a magic carpet ride this weekend. And I would expect that things will swing back in Ohio State's favor. The relationship with Larry Johnson's good. Ohio State's the dream school, yada, yada, yada. Trajan Odom, he's from North Carolina. He plays in North Carolina. He's originally from California. USC and Oregon are the other real teams in the mix here. It feels like Ohio State or Oregon. He will visit Ohio State this weekend, Oregon on June 21st. That June 21st weekend has a lot of crossover between Ohio State and Oregon. So it's one to watch. Trajan is like, he's a safe player. Okay. Like I think he's a good player. He's 6'4", 260 pounds. He's your very safe Ohio State 3-tech. Like it's kind of the type of player Larry Johnson's made a living off of in the last couple of decades. Like he's a good player, but if you're talking about which of these guys is like the dynamic game changer type, it's probably Shanklin. And then there's Fahim Delane, who is Ohio State, LSU, Oregon, who will be at Oregon on that 21st weekend of June. Maybe, right? Like this is a funny recruitment to me, Andrew, because this goes back to like January, right? And every time people are like, oh, we think we could see a decision from Fahim Delane. And then Fahim Delane's like, oh, I'm going to take some more time. This could be the time we see a decision from Fahim Delane. He's closing things down. He's narrowing things down. He's getting close. I'll take some more time. The conversation was always get to the official visits and then see what happens. So the question is, now that you're to the official visits, do you need to get through the official visits? And Ohio State will be the first one he takes. He's expected to be at LSU next weekend and then Oregon. I don't think that it matters about the order because there are two separate trains of thought. One, having the last visit is really, really important, especially on impressionable youth. Number two, the other side is, well, after a month of traveling nonstop, kids get really worn down. And if we go back to the JT Tuimoloau recruitment, you remember, like, he didn't want to take the Alabama official visit because he was just exhausted. He was just flying back and forth everywhere and was like, I don't care. I don't need to do this. I know where I want to go. So it took away a bullet out of Nick Saban's gun at that point. So there is that mindset as well. So which one do you prescribe or subscribe to?
Well, what I'm really prescribing to now is, I remember you being, I can't remember if you were on vacation or where you were at, but I remember texting you and telling you, I think that Fahim Delane is getting ready to commit. And that was months back. And then here we are now in June. So I am kind of hoping he takes that obviously an Ohio State fan in me, hoping he takes that JT Tuimoloau approach and just scratches those other visits. Maybe he's over the process. If there was any one name on this list of visitors this weekend that I would love to see commit, he would be the guy. I think Jackson Lloyd, offensive tackle, is probably right up there with him too. But I think we both feel Ohio State's still going to win it out. But is it going to be here in the next week, or is it going to be here in the next 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah.
So
it is the challenge. I mean, this is 6 months now since Ohio State decided to not retain Perry Eliano, who was hired by Toledo as the cornerbacks coach by the Rockets on Thursday. Congrats to Coach Eliano. He's a great person. I really enjoy him. And when he was recruiting Fahim Delane, and when he left Ohio State, that the Buckeyes took a blow there, similar to what happened with Dorian Brew. Like that mattered, and it did help, or it did set things back a little bit. But it's been 6 months of getting to know McArary. It's been 6 months of having the additional recruitment chops of Tim Walton involved. Ryan Day has been very involved. There's nothing that Fahim Delane has not seen on the recruiting tour that he's been on for the last year and a half. So this is going to come down to just, does he feel like he's ready to end the circus? And I guess we'll see. We'll go back to Jackson Lloyd for a second. He's the guy. It's Ohio State, USC, and Alabama. Some talk that Alabama is the favorite. The Buckeyes, their goal here is simple. Like, you're a better fit in our locker room. You're going to fit in with our guys. And so they want to really feature the players on the team this weekend with him. They want to show him what makes their locker room at Ohio State different. Javen McFadden, I think we both agree, is a favorite to land at Ohio State. You on the OhioState.Rivals.com message board set an over-under on commitments by next Wednesday at 2.5 from this class this weekend, and I from this group this weekend, and I would bet you're talking McFadden, Delane, and who's the edge of it.
If I had 4 names that I was watching, and I'm not saying 4, but the 4 names that I would be watching would be Fahim Delane, Trajan Odom, and then I would say, I guess McFadden, Stargell both, but Quincy Porter I don't know. There's like 5 names that I feel like you can at least kind of see it happening with, but I think I just felt like 2.5 was the safe number.
Yeah, I think that there's a real argument with Stargell. If he wants in, again, they'll take him. McFadden, I would not be surprised. I don't even know if he has any other official visits scheduled, which is always telling. And then Delane is sort of the wild card to me. So that's the official visitors. 10 of them coming this weekend, 10 of them last weekend. We're 2 weeks into the official visit month, and we'll have 20 visitors through. 5 of the 13 commitments will have been in on their official visits. And then things really ramp up for the 14th and the 21st. And we'll talk about those over the next couple of weeks. But we're going to take another break real quick. Take a deep breath. This has been an exhausting day. I drove my happy butt home from Columbus and just told folks, we got to sit down and talk stuff, Andrew. We have just too much stuff to not talk about stuff.
Yeah, I hope people understand that we try to be consistent with the show, but it's just really hard with you driving like 7,000 miles a week and me obviously not being like a full-time recruiting guru like you are. Just our schedules are always chaos.
I don't know if people do understand, but more than that, I'm sure they don't care, because that's our job is to provide the stuff. And so we find as much time as we can to provide the stuff. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to catch my breath. We're going to be right back to finish up this episode of Talking Stuff. Thank you for sticking with us on Talking Stuff. Andrew Ellis, Jeremy Birmingham, talking about Buckeyes football recruiting. I mentioned Damian Shanklin. I've mentioned Jahkeem Stewart and the weird waiting game Ohio State has to play here. I've mentioned London Merritt and Zahir Mathis. And then there's Marion Dye, another Indianapolis, another Indiana 2025 defensive tackle prospect who has been at times almost a just assumed commit to Ohio State at some point. But I don't know that it's fair because the Ohio State does have 2 defensive ends committed already, and they're chasing Damian Shanklin, and I don't know how many they're going to take. I've heard that number may only end up being 3, and so if that's the case, then the Buckeyes may get put in a position where they have to choose between Damian Shanklin and Marion Dye. I'm not suggesting that's why Marion Dye is visiting Michigan this weekend, but hold on, I just went through puberty there, I think. My voice just cracked.
Yes, you did.
Wow. Feels good to be a man finally. But between those 2 players in Indiana, I don't know what the hell is going on with my brain. I cannot say Indiana. It's Indianapolis. Between those guys, like Marion Dye's visiting Michigan this weekend. Shanklin has the momentum happening with LSU. Like, are you worried, Andrew, about another summer swoon, a summer slip up for Larry Johnson and the defensive end recruiting? Or does the fact that Zahir Mathis and London Merritt are already committed give you at least a little bit of relief?
Yeah, having those 2 guys committed already is a far cry from some of the classes we've seen before when we've had that summer lull. And I think we both feel really good about Justin Hill still, even though I know he's not a pure defensive end or anything like that. I'm not really worried about a summer lull. But I will ask you, when you mentioned Marion Dye, you did say defensive tackle, right? So I've seen his weight listed.
End. He's a defensive end.
I saw his weight listed as like 270 the other day. So like I was like defensive. I don't know. I was kind of just.
Who's got him at? Someone does him at 270.
Yeah, I'm on 247 has him at 6'5", 270, and I saw that earlier today, and I was like, why the hell have we been saying defensive end with him? Maybe that listing is wrong. On 3 has him at 268.
Well,
so,
I mean, a year ago he was in the 235 range. So if he's put on that weight, that's good for him. That actually makes him a more likely choice for Ohio State, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if that's his weight and that's his, trajectory, then who says they can't get him and Damian Shanklin? I don't know, but yeah, with Dye was supposed to be at Georgia this week. I thought that Georgia was the competition there. Instead, he's visiting Michigan. Haven't talked much about Michigan there, but
he was not. I mean, 2 weeks ago, Michigan was not in his top schools, and now he's making an official visit. So,
right, exactly. So that's kind of coming out of nowhere before the Ohio State visit, though. So I don't think that's like something that should, set panic alarms off or anything like that. So I mean, whatever. Taking a local visit, and then he'll visit Ohio State next week or 2 weeks, whatever that date was. You said.
Yeah, it's a couple big weeks for Larry Johnson and his group, though. I mean, if you look at this defensive line class, potentially, you have Zahir Mathis, you have London Merritt. If you can right the ship with Damian Shanklin, you add him and Marion Dye, and then maybe someone like Trajan Odom with Justin Hill on the periphery as that hybrid guy, then you are set. And then you can wait until you find out what happens with Jahkeem Stewart. But, like, I don't think you want to get out of this summer with Dye or Shanklin not committed. I think it's very important that one of those 2 guys is in, because Odom, again, I think can be a good player, but he's a longer term development guy, in my opinion, than Dye or Shanklin is. So having this group be a 5 or 6 man total class in the defensive line, I think is pretty important. And then you just swing for the fences with our guy, Jahkeem Stewart. So I don't think there's going to be a summer slip, but I do think that Ohio State is in an interesting position. And I think you're going to see the prospect of Jahkeem Stewart held against Ohio State in some way or by other schools, which is the funniest thing in the world about recruiting. Because if you are being honest with yourself, you could say a kid from Louisiana is never coming to Ohio State, right? There's been 2 of them that I can remember in my lifetime. 3. There was Jair Brown, the cornerback, who was originally from Cincinnati. There was Jonathan Wells, and there was Nader Abdallah. Okay. So like there's 3 guys in the last 25 years. And yet people will try to say, well, you shouldn't go to Ohio State because Jahkeem Stewart's going to go there. Meanwhile, everyone who covers Ohio State or roots for Ohio State is going, there's no way in hell Jahkeem Stewart's coming here. So it's a funny juxtaposition.
Yeah, it is. Real quick, last thing on defensive line, that Maxwell Roy kid from St. Joe's in Philly, I assume probably not a name to even talk about anymore. He was going to visit this weekend, and by the time people listen to this, he may have committed to Michigan. I think he had a bad injury maybe recently, like it's something that, I don't know, changed up his recruitment. Does that sound right?
I mean, he's a kid that has always liked Ohio State. I don't know that Ohio State has always liked him as much as he liked Ohio State. He visited Michigan. Like, I think it seems pretty likely that's where he ends up. And again, the fact that when I'm doing my research on Tuesday and I ask who's visiting this weekend and he wasn't on the list, then things change. There are players committed to other schools, like Jaden Harmon, the linebacker from Rome, Georgia, who's committed to Alabama, has not been talked about much, but he's still expected to visit next weekend. So like there are guys that aren't being talked about who will visit, and he's not one of them. So it, to me, indicates where Ohio State has prioritized things. So speaking of priorities, let's wrap up this episode of Talking Stuff before we hit the 4-minute offense. With Justin Hill and Dorian Brew. Both those guys are visiting USC this weekend. I think after the official visit to Columbus a week ago for Justin Hill, I don't want to say it's in ink, but I have Justin Hill in the Ohio State class in pretty solidly written pencil. It looks like ink. Like I'm really digging it into the paper. We'll see if anything gets wonky with Oregon in 2 weeks, but I don't think that the USC visit is enough to change things there. I think Alabama and Oregon are much more of the threat, but this weekend is not that big of a threat. Now, USC for Dorian Brew has remained a little bit more solid, I think, in that conversation. Although the last couple of weeks, because of the Blake Woodby decommitment, things have certainly swung back toward Ohio State in a lot of ways with Dorian Brew. There is a lot of clarity about positional plans for him, which is you're going to be a cornerback. This is not you're not going to come in and we'll figure it out. Like the goal is as a corner, a guy who can play the nickel, be a Jordan Hancock type of slot corner, a bigger physical slot, but a guy who has the athletic traits to play on the outside. And that's the path that they want him to take. So now that you have some clarity there, I think it does open the door for Ohio State and Dorian Brew to reconnect in a really positive way for Buckeyes fans. That said, if Dorian Brew makes that official visit over the June 21st weekend and the Buckeyes are still feeling like there's, I don't want to say games to be played or if this wants to keep going, there are other players like Brandon Finney from Maryland who is visiting the weekend of the 14th as an official visitor, who I think Ohio State would be more than happy to turn to in that instance. So Finney was only offered, I think, on May 20th, has the official visit set up. If the Buckeyes push there, I think they could be the team to beat. And then we're talking, the fourth safety, because Dorian Brew would be out of that conversation. The fourth safety would be and I say fourth by presuming that Fahim Delane is in the class. Then the fourth one would likely be that Messiah Delhomme from Virginia, who does not get talked about a lot, but he visits next weekend as well. So there's clarity forming in the defensive backfield, and that's really all you can ask for at this time of year is clarity.
Yeah, I don't care about USC and Justin Hill. I don't think USC is a factor there unless there's some type of shenanigans this weekend. Dorian Brew, if I'm a defensive player, I can't see a defensive player like that committing to USC unless now with Alex Grinch gone, they show this fall that they're not going to give up 40 points a game. And I know whatever 5-star from Georgia is committed to USC now, although he's going to eventually sign with Georgia, just like the kids last cycle did. But I don't know. It's just funny because in January, Dorian Brew was going to commit to Ohio State. And then suddenly it's like, oh, Ohio State's 4th or 5th now. And now it seems like Ohio State's back in the driver's seat, and I'm not going to complain about that at all.
Yeah, the question marks are there. Like there was not just a plan to commit. There was a commitment date publicly announced. There were graphics made. There were all of the things, all of the hallmarks of a commitment. And then Ohio State decided to move on from Perry Eliano. And whether or not that's an excuse that was used as an effort to say, hey, let's take a step back, whether they wanted to just take a step back and that was the convenient explanation, whatever, it doesn't really matter. The Buckeyes, especially Tim Walton, like they never stopped being involved with Dorian Brew. They never stopped recruiting him. It was kind of a, hey, you know who we are, you know what we are, we love you, we're here for you when you want to come back home type of deal. And sometimes you have to let these kids sow their wild oats, Andrew. And as a young man yourself who wants to build a family and start a family one day, you'll have to have these difficult conversations with your own children. And you're going to have to say, I love you, little Andrew, but you're going to need to fly. You got to fly this coop. You got to be a bright, beautiful bird and be whoever you want to be, you know? And you got to say, hey, man, the world is a cage, but it's not a cage keeping you locked in. It's keeping the big bad world out. You know what I mean?
That was pretty deep. So
thank you.
I will remember those words for the rest of my life.
Yeah. You can't be afraid to tell them like the cage is not to keep you in. It's to protect you. Okay. Because there's bears out there and they will eat you because bears eat birds. 4-minute offense. Let's wrap this up. We are losing the plot quickly on a Thursday night. What else is on your mind, Andrew?
Just 2 quick notes on a couple other guys. Trey McNutt visiting Miami this weekend.
Bienvenido a Miami.
Wow. Big Willie style. I saw a reputable national guy. I can't remember. It might have been Alan True, one of those guys who's actually, reliable and good. I think he said something about how he still feels like Trey McNutt is going to end up in Columbus when all is said and done. I know you have been not agreeing with that sentiment. Do you still feel the same way?
I don't think anything's changed. I know I'm on my own. I know I'm on an island in this
lonely
space.
Island.
Yeah, it's a fine, lonely island I'm on, and I don't think that Trey McNutt ends up at Ohio State. I mean, I just don't see it. If I'm wrong, I'm fine with it. I've been wrong before. I'm not afraid to be wrong. The vibe just doesn't feel right when it comes to that being what he wants. And, I don't think you can hate on a kid for it. Trey McNutt's an awesome kid. I love the kid. He's going to be great wherever he goes, but I just don't think he wants to go to Ohio State. And that's okay. Like, not every kid has to want to go to Ohio State.
Yep, that's true.
But David Sanders has to want to go to Ohio State. This class needs David Sanders. That's what I could see it in your eyes. That's where you're going next, right?
Yeah, you read my mind. So we're actually going to probably keep this to 4 minutes for once. So entering crunch time for David Sanders. We know Ohio State gets the last visit end of the month. He just visited Clemson. They were kind of viewed as a favorite there for a while. I think they've maybe fallen a bit. Now he's at Georgia this weekend. That's always scary. Then he goes to Tennessee, who is maybe 1B to Ohio State's 1A right now. And then
or
he
vice versa.
Alabama.
Right?
Or vice versa. Then it's Alabama, then it's Ohio State. So we've talked about him ad nauseum, but crunch time is coming. Any big thoughts? I assume nothing has changed on your end or your feelings or anything on that one.
No, I mean, I think it's Ohio State or Tennessee. I think what's interesting about Clemson is that there may be no program in the country that you get a more immediate tactile response from their visits. If a kid visits Clemson and he doesn't commit to them within the next 2 or 3 days, I don't think he's committing there. So to me, they're not a concern. Tennessee, Georgia is a concern always because Georgia is the only school in the country that can compete with Ohio State on every single level right now. And they are a two-time national champion in the last 3 years, et cetera, so on and so forth. But I don't think that's where he wants to be. I think it's Ohio State or Tennessee. Nothing's changed.
Okay. I think we're at 3 minutes. One quick in or out. Random name, not even offered yet. Dwayne Galloway, defensive back.
I mean, if we're going to go back to camp, Dwayne Galloway was at camp on Wednesday at Ohio State, the Marion Franklin cornerback, who's a top 10 player in the state of Ohio. I have been not necessarily vocally having my doubts about his ability to play at Ohio State, but I was not there. I was not there on the Dwayne Galloway train. I'm not sure that I'm still there, but I'm now like watching the train because he was pretty good on Wednesday. We knew he was fast. He ran like a 4.35 at Ohio State. Those are hand timed. So even if it's 4.44, which is probably more likely, like that's still really fast. He was better in coverage than I'd seen on tape. I did not love his film. But I have a lot of question marks about like footwork and mechanical stuff, technical stuff. Tim Walton seemed to be open to the idea of offering Dwayne Galloway, but they want to see him take the stuff that he was coached up on Wednesday and come back and show them that he wants that opportunity. If he can take the stuff that he learned on Wednesday, come back in 2 weeks, come back June 17th camp and apply those things and still be the physical, very confident player he was on Wednesday, I think you could see him in the class at Ohio State. And I think maybe it would extend to a fourth cornerback in that case, because that's not a situation where they would take him over Dorian Brew or something like that, or even Brandon Finney for that matter. But I do think that there's the door it's not open, but like the door is ajar. And if he wants it and he's willing to go out and earn it, the Buckeyes told Denzel Ward 10 years ago, if you want it, you need to do this and this and this and come back and get it. Terry McLaurin, if you want it, you were really good today. Show us today wasn't a fluke. Come back and do it again. For the players that want that, it's and have done it, it's nearly always worked out. So my advice to the people who are advising him would be put the ego aside, and if that's the offer you really want, go get it. He definitely opened my eyes. He checked in at like 5'11". I've seen him listed on some websites at like 6'2". I said last year when he visited for an Ohio State game, there's no way that was accurate because he was shorter than I am, and I'm 6 foot tall. So that doesn't help when he's listed at 6'2", 175, and then he shows up on campus and he's 5'11", 165. It's kind of jarring, and then you don't know what to expect. But the raw material is there. So the question is, how bad does he want it? I think he can work his way into the class.
Cool. I know, like when you guys go to those camps, a lot of times if a coach takes a player to the side and they have like a one-on-one or a heart-to-heart, usually that means something. I know he hasn't been offered yet, but I'm wondering if that's going to mean something come December. So
yeah, what it means is that they probably, I know that the general way that happens is camp ends, everyone gets done with their one-on-ones, then they all split up, everyone goes, gets their t-shirts and their box lunch. And then those 10, 12, 13 players that the coach is really focused on go back into the offices and sit down and talk to Ryan Day or talk to the position coaches. And generally that's where they get their offers. That offer did not come, so I would assume the conversation was similar to what I just described with Tim Walton, and that's the next step. Do you want this? If you do want it, come and get it. So I believe that was Rihanna who said it. If you want it, come and get it. Nah.
Sounds about right.
Was it Rihanna? I don't know. No,
I don't know. Maybe it was Celine Dion. It wasn't Celine Dion. I don't know. We've been talking too long.
I don't think so. It probably wasn't Rihanna. It was like,
I can hear the song, but I'm not going to sing. I can hear the song in my head, but okay.
Yeah, I hear music in my head all the time. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Sorry if I said anything to offend anyone. I never know. But it's been a long day. It's been a long week. And we felt it was important to get you this episode of Talking Stuff. So if you liked it, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to this. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, do whatever makes you feel good. But as long as it's showing us some sort of feedback, so we know, that we're doing the right thing for you. So other than that, have a great weekend. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. He's Andrew Ellis. This has been Talking Stuff on the podcast. We will see you next time.